The film begins with a former Marine named Terry, who is riding his motorcycle on his way to pay his cousin Mike's bail to get him out of jail. Suddenly, a police car appears behind him and crashes into him, causing him to fall to the ground. Two officers step out of the car, restrain Terry, and inform him that they have been chasing him for a while and tried to stop him, but he did not comply, forcing them to hit him. Terry is shocked and denies any wrongdoing, but the officers ignore his words and tell him that they received a report about a stolen motorcycle and suspect that he is the thief. Terry tries to defend himself, insisting that he has stolen nothing, but the officers disregard his explanation and begin searching him, only to find a bag containing $36,000. At that moment, they accuse him of drug trafficking, believing that an ordinary person carrying such a large amount of money is suspicious. Terry explains that there is no law preventing him from carrying this sum and clarifies that the money is meant to pay his cousin's bail, who was wrongfully arrested in a drug case he had nothing to do with. Terry continues to explain that he sold his car and his share in a restaurant to gather the money, emphasizing that he has no connection to drug dealing. He also clarifies that the required bail amount is $10,000, while the remaining money is intended to start a business with his cousin once he is released. However, the officers ignore his explanations and tell him that he is free to leave, but they will confiscate his money, and he must retrieve it later through legal channels due to their suspicions about its source. Terry pleads with them to allow him to keep the bail amount, but they refuse, taking the entire sum and handing him a receipt before leaving. He is left feeling wronged and helpless, as he no longer has the money needed to save his cousin from being transferred to state prison. Terry rushes to the city courthouse, where he meets an employee named Elliot and asks him to delay his cousin's transfer so he can arrange the bail. However, Elliot informs him that this is not possible, as the transfer process has already begun, and Mike will be sent to state prison to serve the remainder of his sentence there. Meanwhile, a trainee lawyer named Summer overhears the conversation. She takes Terry to a cafe to better understand his case and try to help him. Terry recounts what happened with the officers, insisting that they seized his money without justification. He also reveals that his cousin had worked with the government, helping them take down a major drug dealer. However, afterward, the city police officers framed him for a crime and unjustly threw him in jail. The bigger problem is that the drug dealer's men, who are imprisoned in state prison, are waiting for Mike to arrive so they can take revenge on him. This makes paying his bail a matter of life and death before his transfer. Summer then tells Terry that the city's police force is corrupt and that the city itself is plagued by extreme poverty, driving officers to abuse their power and steal money from people. To help cover the city's debts, it has become nearly impossible for Terry to win this case. He might have to wait years before he can recover his money from the police. Even if he files a lawsuit against them, it is unlikely that he will win. Summer advises him to focus on gathering $10,000 as quickly as possible to pay for his cousin's bail, while she will do her best to delay Mike's transfer to state prison. Terry thanks her and leaves, then calls his restaurant partner Lulu and asks him for a temporary loan. Lulu agrees, but asks for some time to arrange the money. That night, Terry sleeps in the woods, and the next morning, he heads to the city police station, where he meets Officer Jason. He tells her what happened, showing her a copy of the police report and describing the officer who took his money, Mason. After listening to his story, Jason becomes tense and asks him to wait for a moment, then goes to call Mason and informs him that someone has filed a complaint against him. Mason arrives, furious, and orders Terry to leave immediately before he gets himself into trouble. But Terry refuses to leave without getting his money back. At that moment, the police chief, Byrne, steps in, examines the report, and tells Terry that it is invalid, claiming that the police did nothing wrong. He orders Terry to leave immediately and stop recording the conversation. At this point, it becomes clear that Terry had been recording the conversation to expose police corruption. Terry calmly turns off the recording and tells Byrne that he isn't here to cause trouble. He just needs his money to pay his cousin's bail. He offers a deal. He will take only the $10,000 he needs, while the police can keep the rest. Byrne agrees, but asks Terry to meet him the next day at a specific location where he will allow him to see his cousin and pay the bail before Mike is transferred to state prison. Feeling relieved, Terry thanks him and leaves, unaware that Byrne is just as corrupt as the other officers he has dealt with. The next morning, Terry arrives at the agreed location to meet the sheriff, only to be shocked when Byrne coldly tells him that he was 3 minutes late, forcing them to transfer his cousin to state prison. Byrne adds that the transport van has just left and that Terry can catch up to it for a final glance at his cousin. Furious, Terry speeds off on his motorcycle, chasing the van. He knocks on the window until Mike sees him, assuring him that he will get him out of prison as soon as possible. Terry then meets with Summer and tells her everything that happened, asking what his next step should be. Summer tells him that there is no solution except paying the bail. Immediately, Terry calls his restaurant partner to ask about the money transfer, but his partner shocks him with devastating news. The police raided the restaurant and seized all the money he had. Terry instantly realizes that Byrne orchestrated the raid, and rage consumes him, leaving him unable to think clearly as he teeters on the edge of losing control. Meanwhile, Byrne orders his officers to track down Terry and gather all available information on him. Officer Jason immediately starts her investigation. At that moment, Terry storms into the police station, boiling with anger. Byrne steps out, casually asking why he's there. Terry reminds him that they had an agreement, which Byrne broke, and demands to know why he betrayed him. Byrne mockingly replies that he is free to do whatever he wants and doesn't take orders from someone beneath him. Meanwhile, Jason completes her investigation and tells Mason that Terry was a former Marine, an expert in hand-to-hand combat, and the strongest and most renowned soldier in his class. So much so that his name appears in Google searches. Realizing how dangerous Terry is, Mason readies his weapon and steps outside to confront him, ordering him to back away from Brian. But in a split second, Terry disarms Byrne and grabs him firmly, preventing him from escaping. He then delivers a brutal strike to Mason, knocking his gun away. With the upper hand, Terry warns the surrounding officers that if anyone tries to interfere, he won't hesitate to take Byrne down. Intimidated, no one dares to make a move. Terry then marches Byrne and Mason into the station, ordering Jason to handcuff them, and she obeys immediately. He then demands his confiscated $10,000, and Jason leads him inside to retrieve it. Inside, Terry is stunned to find a massive arsenal of weapons, an unbelievable sight for a normal police station. He instantly realizes that the guns are stolen and that the entire department is corrupt. Terry then orders Jason to help him leave the station safely, ensuring that no one attacks him outside. She agrees and drives him in a police car, dropping him off at a location of his choice. Before stepping out, Terry asks her to report his escape so that the police can arrest him quickly. Terry heads straight to the courthouse and pays Mike's bail. Summer, confused, asks how he got the money, and he tells her that he has decided to sacrifice himself. He will go to jail in his cousin's place. Moments later, the police arrive and arrest him violently. Terry is taken for a medical checkup where the doctor confirms that he is unharmed. Ready to be transferred to prison, Terry is suddenly surprised when a guard tells him that the prison warden wants to see him. When Terry meets the warden, he is shocked by a tragic revelation. The warden informs him that one of the inmates stabbed and killed his cousin. He then hands Terry back all of his money and tells him that he has arranged a car for him to leave the city immediately, warning him never to return or seek the truth, or else he will meet a similar fate. Terry rushes to his cousin's body, collapsing in tears, unable to comprehend the loss. Later, Terry meets with Summer, seeking her help to leave the city. On the way, Summer shares something suspicious she discovered. She had been researching Byrne and found out that he and his officers fabricate charges against innocent people, like Mike, imprisoning them for exactly 90 days before forcing them to pay exorbitant bail fees to be released. However, the strangest part is that all inmates are held for exactly 90 days, with no clear reason why. But Terry, drowning in grief, pays little attention to her findings. Terry then picks up the car Byrne arranged and leaves the city. One night, Summer is asleep in her home when strange noises wake her up. As she walks into the bathroom, she is horrified to find a heroin syringe in the sink. When she looks at her arm, she realizes that someone injected her with drugs while she was sleeping. Then, she notices a police sticker inside her home and immediately understands. The police did this to frame her as punishment for trying to expose their corruption. Panicked, she calls Terry and begs him for help. When he arrives, she seems fine, but he insists on taking her to the hospital for a checkup. She refuses. Summer explains that the police did this to ruin her reputation, get her fired from her job, and separate her from her daughter, who lives with her ex-husband. She also reveals that she was a former drug addict, but the judge cleared her criminal record after she fully recovered, allowing her to work in court. The next day, Summer arrives at the courthouse, where the judge informs her that a complaint has been filed against her, accusing her of relapsing into drug use, and demands that she undergo a drug test. She immediately realizes that Byrne orchestrated the setup and reluctantly submits to the test, devastated. Unfortunately, the test results come back positive, leading to her dismissal from her job and losing custody of her daughter. Meanwhile, Terry is driving out of the city when Mason suddenly blocks his path. Mason reminds him that he warned him never to return and then attempts to attack him. However, Terry quickly gains the upper hand, using a stun gun on Mason before speeding away. Later, Terry calls Summer to check on her, and she tells him what happened to her. She also tells him that she is packing her things to leave the city, as staying would put her life in danger. Terry gives her the address of his old restaurant and asks her to meet him there. That night, Summer arrives at the restaurant to find Terry injured, while one of his friends tends to his wounds. The friend soon leaves them alone to talk. As they discuss the mystery behind the 90-day detentions and forced bail payments, Summer suggests reaching out to Elliot, the only person who might know the truth. But Elliot is too afraid to reveal any information, fearing that he might lose his job. However, he tells them that the only person who can uncover the full truth is the city judge. Terry and Summer head to the judge's house and demand that he confess the truth. The judge reveals that he was involved in a manslaughter case that resulted in the deaths of several people and led to the city's financial collapse. As part of his punishment, he was ordered to pay a massive fine, which forced the authorities to pressure him into resigning. But Byrne, who didn't have the required money, devised a scheme to stay in power. He began arresting innocent people, sentencing them to 90 days in jail, and then forcing them to pay exorbitant bail fees for release. He used this money to pay off his fine and bribe officers to ensure their silence. His men even stopped random pedestrians on the street and fabricated charges against them, just like they did to Terry, all for the sake of collecting more money. To keep the judge silent, Byrne gave him a portion of the money, while the rest was used to pay off the city's debts. The judge also reveals that the police are legally required to record all arrests with audio and video, and the court has the right to review these recordings to ensure the safety of the inmates. However, the law states that after 90 days, the court loses access to these recordings. That's why Burns' men detained every prisoner for exactly 90 days to erase any trace of their corruption before the court could intervene. The judge tells them that the recordings are stored in a secret room inside the courthouse. Terry and Summer sneak in, manage to steal the evidence, but then realize that the police have set the building on fire in an attempt to destroy the recordings and erase all proof of their crimes. Summer asks Terry to head to the car while she retrieves her drug test results from the judge's office. Terry waits outside, but unfortunately, Summer gets caught by the police. Terry, furious and desperate, comes up with an idea. He ambushes an officer, handcuffs him, and uses his radio to contact the other officers. He tells them that he has taken their colleague hostage and won't release him unless they let Summer go. Furthermore, he also warns them that he has the stolen recordings that could expose their corruption. The officers, terrified, agree to meet him at sunrise the next day. The following morning, Burns' men gather, waiting for Terry. One officer notices a parked car in the distance and assumes Terry is inside, rushing towards it. But when he opens the door, he only finds the handcuffed hostage. At that moment, Terry is already inside the police station. Suddenly, he crashes through the entrance with a car and immediately attacks Byrne. He then turns to Jess, telling her that he knows she's a good person deep down and is only forced to work with them. He begs her to help save Summer. Jess hesitates, then suddenly betrays him, pulling out her gun and ordering him to leave. As Terry steps outside, he finds all the officers waiting for him, led by Mason. Mason taunts him, saying that he injected Summer with a fatal overdose, and she only has minutes left to live. He then raises his gun to execute Terry, but one officer, named IPO, finally has a change of heart and refuses to go along with Mason's plan. Just then, Byrne emerges from the station and shoots Terry, hitting him in the leg. Amid the chaos, Terry grabs IPO and they take cover behind a car. Terry then engages in a brutal fight against the officers, managing to take down several of them. He then escapes with IPO and Summer, racing against time to save her. At the last possible moment, Terry injects her with the antidote, saving her life. The real shock comes when one of the police cars chasing Terry crashes into another vehicle. It turns out that the driver is a female officer who decided to help him after realizing the truth. It is also revealed that Terry had activated his car's camera, recording everything Byrne and his officers had done. At that moment, Jess finally turns against Byrne and arrests him for corruption. Minutes later, Terry arrives at the hospital to get Summer treated. Then he returns to his car, retrieves the recordings, and hands them over to the state police to expose Byrne and his men. And so the story comes to an end.